and very contagious, because we are really connected. And as this next century evolves, we are going to start to see that through our global economy, through our global environment, and through all the things that do connect us. So my mission as an educator, as a practitioner, as a simple citizen who really cares about this stuff, is to make sure that we are paying attention and we are awake, so that we don't have to wait for our economy or for our climate to tell us that we're connected, so that we can understand that now, and that we can start to be, as Gandhi said, the change we seek to have in the world. And I have one closing quote, and it's from one of our greats, Robert F. Kennedy. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lots of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. So I say to you, my fellow citizens, be your ripple of hope, and be it today. Thank you very much. Well, I have to be careful because one of my mentors and somebody who knows a lot about this issue is in the audience today. I'd like to recognize Dr. Kantati Supamankan and Nook Supamankan. He is the former Thai foreign minister and has served at the UN addressing these sorts of things. But from my perspective, responsibility to protect is a cautious doctrine. It provides legal and ethical justification. And it's really critical because at the international legal system, you do not want to set up a precedence for allowing intervention from one sovereign state or a group of collection of sovereign states into another without some principled justification. That could give rise to all sorts of actions taking the guise of responsibility to protect. And this has indeed been one of the criticisms of the doctrine. But at the same time, the question is not just a legal and ethical one. It's a strategic and tactical one. How indeed should outsiders go about removing Mugabe? Mugabe is the president of Zimbabwe. He has been there in power since Zimbabwe received independence from British colonial rule in 1981. It's the only leader the country has known. I had the opportunity to work in Zimbabwe in 2003. And the country is one of cautious hope and optimism about democracy because they have not tasted it. Now, to the north is Zambia, and Zimbabwe and Zambia used to be united as Rhodesia under colonialism. Zambia has had great success with democracy, and it has been one of the few countries in the region that has had stability. They have not had conflict. So you have the northern success story and the southern critical crisis. The question is how to remove Mugabe, but more importantly, what do you do then? Democracy building, or should they have some other form of governance? Do the people that intervene under responsibility to protect get to dictate how that should happen? Should the people of Zimbabwe figure out for themselves, for the first time ever, how they want their country to be ruled? How do you do this quickly? If you don't have controlled post-intervention process in place, chaos strikes. Military might take over or some other powerful entity. And so I think that at the one hand, you're right in that Zimbabwe has not been seen as a country of great concern to many of the most powerful nations. They don't have a large natural resource pool of something that's valuable like oil. But at the same time, what we've learned, if anything, from Iraq, and we should have learned it from many other examples in history, is that intervention is not fast or easy. It takes sustained and long-term dedication. It takes a lot of resources. As the intervener, you become then somehow responsible for the protection of people, humanitarian, food, medical supplies, etc., and also safety and security. And currently, the international community at the UN level, and even the United States government at the executive branch level, does not have an agency or a group who is well qualified to do this kind of long-term work. So the infrastructure is not yet in place. But that said, it's no excuse to sort of let Mugabe continue on indefinitely, because the crisis is at critical point. And what a lot of folks don't realize about Zimbabwe is that the country is the gateway to Southern Africa. All the shipping ports in South Africa have roads that have to go through Zimbabwe to get to Zambia, Mozambique, Botswana, etc. So it's not just a national crisis. It's a regional crisis, potentially. And it's certainly a region that has enough, states have enough interest in that region to want to do something. I think the greater question is how and by whom. I'm working with Mediators Beyond Borders to do some work at the civil society level. We're working with church organizations, community groups, local level organizations in Zimbabwe to help build infrastructure in terms of a communication network. What was learned from South Africa is that in order to maintain peace during a regime change, there has to be a good system of communication in place so that people feel like messages and information is being sent around, and that prevents panic. So we're trying to set up such an infrastructure in place for Zimbabwe at the civil society level so that when Mugabe steps down or is asked to leave, there will be civil society groups in country who understand their own capacity, their own culture, who are ready to address some of the needs, not all. But this is certainly not enough. Well, I think that, you raised this question, which is we're aware what's happening at the global level, and we're aware of what's happening inside of ourselves, hopefully, and how do we connect everything in between? And so I suggest that, at each level there's an appropriate role. So as an individual, there are things and actions that you can take to make a difference, and only you can determine what your role should be, given your skills, given your capacity, given your passions. At a civil society level, there's a role. At a governmental level, there's a role. But beyond that, this idea of collective consciousness I'll return to. 15 years ago, nobody thought of recycling. And now most of us recognize when drinking something or using something, we look first for the recycling bin. And if there isn't one, sometimes we revert to the trash can. But it's a change. We've also recognized that in the field of conflict resolution since 1980s, use of conflict resolution, the peaceful mechanisms to resolve disputes, has increased phenomenally. It's increased domestically to the point where the Texas Bar Association wants to consider banning a certain amount of mediation because most civil cases are going to mediation. And there's not enough cases going to the court to sustain keeping a civil court there. We're seeing this increased use by nations. We're seeing it in other countries. There's something happening. People are getting the message. And it's not just, it's very peaceful and it feels good and it's the right thing to do. It's beyond that. It's substantive. It's this idea that you mentioned of needs and interests. How can I best serve my interests?